Good morning, and thank you for this opportunity to talk about the acquisitions that have been purchased through the partnership between the Minnesota Prairie Chicken Society and Pheasants Forever as waterfowl production areas.
I'm Tyler Zimmerman, Wetland Restoration Specialist with Pheasants Forever.
And I'm Sean May, wildlife biologist with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. This marks 8 WPA additions that the Minnesota Prairie Chicken Society and Pheasants Forever has purchased for the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service in Detroit Lakes for 1,849 acres since the year 2017.
The Onstead Tract added 74 acres to the 1,100-acre Hogvet WPA, which also adjoins the 800-acre Julesrud WPA. With U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service and WRP easements, that's about a 3,000-acre complex of grass and wetlands on the Clay County and Ottertail County boundary.
Lofgren added 64 acres to the 200-acre Lofgren WPA, and that is just across the road from the 240-acre Manitoba Junction WPA, and it also touches the 80-acre Highland Grove WMA and a 40-acre WRP easement. So that is over 600 acres in that complex.
The Lurkey and Jetvig tracts started a new WPA called Amundsen Lake, which is now over 500 acres.
The Stahlberger purchase was a north-south 80 and an east-west 80, buffering the Hagman WPA, which is 80 acres of mainly native prairie and wetlands. And this WPA is immediately south of the SGF2 acquisition.
The Lang Tract is a 186-acre addition to the Audubon WPA, which doubles its size. So far, it's the only Prairie Chicken Partnership WPA acquisition in Becker County.
The SGF2 acquisition is over 900 acres, and we will discuss this one much further here this morning.
The Nelson tracts were just won at auction on March 11th, and we'll also talk about these later in the presentation.
So that's a brief overview of all the WPA acquisitions through the Minnesota Prairie Chicken Society and Pheasants Forever partnership. And today we're just going to focus on those last 3. The Lang addition to the Audubon WPA is part of a 670-acre habitat complex by the town of Audubon, which is just west of Detroit Lakes. Whenever we can, we like to start the planning process and even the restoration work on new acquisitions as soon as possible. And we are happy to report the Lang tract closed last June, and nearly all the restoration work has been completed. The majority of the property was planted into good CRP seeding with an abundance of a few forbs like sunflowers and bergamot, so the main uplands did not need to be seeded. We did complete some scattered tree removal in the uplands, 4 wetland restorations, and some old fence removal for a cost of about $64,000.
Of the 4 wetlands we restored, 2 of them had drain tile that were removed. We also filled in ditches with the material from scraping the sediment out. We scraped down to right above the clay layer, which was an average of about 18 inches. The 11.5-acre wetland we suspected had tile because all summer we had water flowing into the wetland, but no surface water flowing out. And sure enough, we found 12-inch tile. This wetland had 2 feet of water when we did our initial site survey in June, and by the time the construction season came around in the fall, this wetland was completely dry. And we ended up finding a 4-inch clay tile that was still functioning. Here are some before and after drone pictures of our wetland restoration. Given that there wasn't very much snow this winter, we were pleasantly surprised on how much water some of these wetlands were holding. The wetland in the foreground is the one that had the 4-inch clay tile, and there's at least 2 feet of water in that one right now. This wetland is perched up on the top of a hill with a small watershed, and it's still almost full and spilling out.
While the main CRP seeding was good, there are 7 acres of brome that we plan to restore in 2025, by chemically fallowing the field this summer and then broadcast seeding it in the fall. We are in the process of transferring the tract right now to the Fish and Wildlife Service, and we'll get some green and white WPA signs on it this summer. Just like the Lang tract of Audubon, the Skarud's Grain Farm 2 tract also closed last June. It is located immediately east and south of the Mahnomen County Airport. It's also located in Rosedale Township in Mahnomen County, which was named Rosedale for all the wild rose in the area. So we are calling it Prairie Rose WPA. The acquisition is 932 acres, which at over $5,000 per acre equals a $5.1 million purchase. And this really is a once-in-a-lifetime acquisition of so many contiguous acres. And every time we're out there, and on Hagman WPA 2, there's always at least one prairie chicken spotted. This one was on the north edge of the rim WRP easement. You can see the cornfield in the foreground and the rim WRP seeding in the background. This is the impressive conservation estate of the area. Santwire WMA is over 500 acres. Paul Senior WPA is 240 acres. Prairie Rose is over 900 acres. And the rim WRP is around 2,000 acres. And drop seed WPA, down there in the lower left or the southwest, that was the first acquisition purchased from the Skaruds in 2021. And that property was also under a Fish and Wildlife Service wetland easement. This property has an interesting history. In the early 1900s, this was part of the St. Pierre Cattle Ranch. They started tiling the property around 1912 and continued until around 1920. And they would tile in the winter when the soil was frozen to keep the walls from collapsing. There is likely much more tile than what we have mapped. Both the Frasers and Skodruds had limited knowledge of the tile installed 100 years ago, and so we reviewed air photos looking for evidence of tile. The Fish and Wildlife Service purchased a wetland easement from the Kramers in 1964. The easement paid for 708 wetland acres at $14.12 per acre for a total of $10,620. The going rate in Minnesota for a wetland easement today is somewhere between $2,000 and $6,000 per wetland acre. Even though the wetlands were already tiled, the easement wouldn't allow for the tile to be maintained. We are unsure when the prairie was broken, but any prairie that was left when the Frasers bought it in the 1970s was soon gone. The Frasers removed all the fence that was left, and we're told there was a lot of fence. The Skaruds bought it in the 2010s as the tile was really beginning to fail. And that's really the reason for the sale. Skaruds knew the tile would keep failing and they would keep losing crop acres. And because they couldn't fix the tile due to the easement, they decided to just get rid of the property. So really, 60 years after the wetland easement was purchased, it directly led to the land being sold. Now that we can restore the wetlands that have been manipulated for over 110 years, we are hopeful we can get the landscape to look a little more like this photo.
There's a lot of restoration to do on this property, and we are currently in the planning phase. For wetlands, there's an impressive 157 wetlands to restore. The majority of them are straightforward and just involve simple tile removal and wetland scrapes, but some of the larger wetlands are more complex and involve the airport property, county and township roads, and WRP. Even though the majority of the property is cropland, there are still some trees to remove. The trees north of the county road we plan to remove in the fall of 2025. And the trees south of the county road we plan to remove after all of the prairie has been seeded, because just to the east of the tree line There are some sandy soil areas that we want to prevent wind erosion. We plan to do the upland seeding over 3 years, starting with the red area on the north end that we'll plan to seed in the fall of 2025. The yellow area we plan to seed in 2026, and the blue area in the fall of 2027. We are planning to burn the Hagman WPA this spring and harvesting the seed this fall as a seed source for the Prairie Rose WPA seedings. We will also be harvesting off of other units nearby after they receive a burn, such as the Wambach WMA and Santee Prairie SNA, which are only 10 miles north of Prairie Rose. We will also be purchasing supplemental seed for the species that don't show up in the seed harvest. Last summer, I took this picture of a wood lily on the native prairie out at Hagman WPA. The transfer from Pheasants Forever to Fish and Wildlife Service will take multiple years and likely happen in many phases as we complete the different parts of restoration.
So those are our tentative plans for the restoration work at Prairie Rose WPA. We'll give you an update on the progression or some after photos when we're all done with it. Now we're going to shift over to the Nelson auction acquisition. And a quick shout out to Grayson Smith for this picture he took out at the Hamden Slough chicken blind a couple weeks ago. The Nelson auction parcels are a great connecting piece 3 miles south of Hawley. They connect the Nelson WPA to the north to the Doran Lake WPA to the south. We had been trying to purchase these tracts from Vernon Nelson in the past, but he had willed them to his heirs. Well, Vernon passed away this last year, and his heirs decided to sell the 4 tracts at auction in March. Historically, in Detroit Lakes, we have not had a great track record of purchasing land at auction, as we always seem to get outbid. But PF was able to purchase 2 of the 4 parcels for sale for $7,000 per acre. The 2 tracts are connected and shown as one tract here in the red outline. It's about 160 acres total, but we are still waiting for the official survey.
Sean and I were so excited about these auction wins that the day after the auction happened, we drove by the site and we already had all of our restoration planning done. We were planning on restoring 22 wetland basins, totaling nearly 23 acres. Some of those wetlands we may be able to do this fall, but the others will have to wait for restoration after the farming is complete in 2026. There's about 140 acres of cropland to seed to native flowers and grasses in fall of 2026. As you can see by this contour map, there's some topography out there with nearly 100-foot difference in elevation. The white areas that you can see are the highest points, and the green and blue are the lowest areas. With that rolling topography, the seeding will be diverse from pasque flowers on the hilltops to prairie cordgrass on the wetland edges. There may even be some native prairie areas on the eastern side of the property where it was too steep to farm. When the property closes, we'll be able to assess the quality of that native prairie.
And I am thinking about a fall seeding so we don't have to fight huge snowdrifts in the spring. And we'll farm it this year and next, and then plan on a fall of 2026 seeding for all of it. In closing, we leave you with this photo from the Stahlberger addition to the Hagman WPA. This is looking southeast towards the Santwire WMA, and that large lake in the background is Santwire Lake. We do want to thank all the people involved in these acquisitions. It's a large workload, and each acquisition is reviewed and signed off by many people. And thank you, members, for your financial support. This is literally your dollars at work, on the ground, restoring wildlife habitat. You should be very proud of the legacy that your support is leaving on the landscape. The partnership between Pheasants Forever and the Minnesota Prairie Chicken Society has been wonderful to work with, and we're so glad that this collaboration has resulted in the acres of habitat that it has. So here's to another 1,800 acres, and if you're looking for me and Tyler, you know where we'll be. We'll be out playing in the mud, removing tile, restoring wetlands, and planting prairie. You know, making habitat.